is a course, literally an introduction to the study of logic. We're going to look at the science, the rational science, founded by Aristotle and pursued with new developments right through this century in the person of Jacques Maritain, in my view, the greatest logician of the 20th century. And it will serve to make it possible for you to do a little self-education, or later, if the Institute is able to offer it, to do rather more advanced kinds of logical study. So in the course of the course, I will be making recommendations for self-study books that I know to be good ones. Some of them are hard to get these days, others are easy. And I'm hoping that this course will set you up to pursue further study on your own, or to be ready to do something more advanced with me or another later on in the AMI cycle. This course is meant to be done in 8 weeks. It is not meant to saddle you with a slew of homework. It asks you to read and then discuss and work through what you've read in these 8 weekly meetings. And unlike Kreef's book and most logic books, this course makes continuous reference to original texts. Okay, so the way the course is set up is there's a textbooky-like essay from me for each of 8 weeks. And then attached to that textbooky lecture are usually two primary texts from Aristotle, from John of St. Thomas, from Jacques Maritain, from Lewis Carroll in one instance. The idea is we'll look at logical doctrine for about the first half of the course. Then we'll take a bit of a break. And for the second half of the course, we'll discuss together the primary texts, which are appended to these logic essays. Before 6:30, I want to say 3 things about the reading for the day. That means the essay from me for the day, which is in 3 parts. First has to do with logic as a liberal art. The second will have to do with the second part here, which is the notion of Aristotelian starting points. And the third will have to do with the doctrine of signs. Now, I'm going to start with an Aristotelian starting point, and it's this. And it's connected with liberal arts. So I want to propose that every single one of you, as you appear this evening, is an accomplished logician. That is, if you're thinking about studying logic as acquiring a skill you lack, I'm here to tell you that it's impossible. You can't do it because you're already a skilled logician and you perform all of the most advanced and sophisticated logical operations on a regular basis every day. You conceive regularly working definitions. You enunciate propositions which must be either true or false. You put those propositions together into inferences. You chase your inferences back to remoter starting points. You ground your opinions in more universal and truer bases. Those are all works of logic. The liberal arts, of which logic is the chief among the trivial arts, the arts of language, the liberal arts are one and all not skills that we acquire on a tabula rasa, but arts by which we perfect what we're already able to do willy-nilly. The point of a liberal art is to make conscious and deliberate what we already do spontaneously and by custom or habit. So we want to make we want to make steady and deliberate things that we already do willy-nilly and by a kind of unsophisticated or unreflective habit. That's what liberal arts are. So liberal arts are the arts of being human.
At what age do we pick up that art? Because do you see it in a 2-year-old, for instance?
Yes,
or
you do.
have...
So I'll give you my favorite story. I have my eldest daughter is named Elizabeth. When she was 3 years old, she made her way into every logic syllabus I've ever done since. We lived in Pleasant Hill. She was up late, it was about 9:30. And I said to her, Elizabeth, it's time to go to bed. All little girls should go to bed when their father tells them to. To which she responded without missing a beat, I am not a little girl. I gave her a syllogism. Elizabeth, you should go to bed. All little girls go to bed when their fathers tell them to. She denied my major. I'm not a little girl. I don't fall under your principle. I ain't going to bed, Daddy. So the answer is we acquire these skills with language. We acquire them with language. If you can string 2 sentences together at the age of 2.5, you're a 2.5-year-old logician. The reason I say we acquire them with language is one of the things we're going to have to study. I'm going to grab a prop here, one moment. This is why we have John of St. Thomas on the reading list. This is a book now translated into English by John Deely, actually facing English and Latin. This is a book called the Tractatus de Signis, the Treatise on Signs, which is the greatest work of logic written since Aristotle. And it's John of St. Thomas in about 1647, meditating with Thomas in mind and Aristotle in mind, how it is that language hooks up with thinking, hooks up with things. And that's the doctrine of signs, which was the last third of your reading for today. So we have signs, language, and our already developed capacity to make use of both. And what logic does is try to render distinct and deliberate what we're already doing any old way. Now, the second way in which we acquire this is not just by language, by ordinary language, but also all of us are involved in various linguistic projects. Alex is an attorney, aren't you, Alex? Alex is an attorney. He's involved in a centuries-old linguistic project in which certain kinds of language are assiduously promoted. And with that language, he has acquired certain habits, right? And probably the locutions to go with them. I have a good friend who's an attorney. We've been friends for 60 years. Whenever I say something with which he doesn't agree, he snaps back to me, that's a fact, not an evidence. That's a fact, not an evidence. You haven't persuaded me that I have to take any account of that. Right? And so it goes. So we're all involved in logico-linguistic projects all the time, and we're all actually quite good at doing logic. Okay? And I'll try to prove that here. Let's see if I can get this to, there it is. So nobody knows what I'm about to write about. Nobody's going to know, I think, what the terms I'm about to use actually mean. I'm presuming that none of you is an Indo-European linguist, and that therefore you haven't got the faintest idea what every diacritical sign in Attic derives from Old Indo-European means. And similarly, that you haven't got any idea what derivation from Old Indo-European is, except that it's related to derives from Old Indo-European. And you don't know what it is for anything to be of Urdic origin. Am I correct? Am I correct? Okay, I think so, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Now, does anything follow from these two statements? Can, for example, can I say, given those two statements, can I say he's leaping with yes, and that's a good thing because the proposed conclusion does not follow. It does not follow. So you looked at this, and even though you were primed to go for this, yeah, Everex, all right. Still can't type. Every X is Y, some Z is X. Now you're ready to say it. Every Z is Y. Every animal is sensitive. Some mammals are animals. Some mammals are sensitive. No problem. So you're primed for this. This sort of looks like that. Right? Looks like this sort of sounds like that. But your logical fallacy detectors were sensitive enough to say, I don't think so. Okay. Okay. So you're all pretty darn good.
It's all dependent on the meaning of those two words, some and every.
Yes. Actually, not quite. They don't have a meaning. What they do is modify the meaning of the subject and predicate terms. If you try to define every, it's like trying to define of. So one of the things we'll do a little later in this course is discuss the difference between categorematic terms, terms that signify on their own, and syncategorematic terms, terms that signify only in union with categorematic terms.
Those letters can be replaced by anything.
Nope.
And then the logic will still be the same based on some and every,
Yeah.
kind of dictating how the relations are.
Right, but this won't work. In other words, there has to be some object of the quantifier here and some predicate here. And the X and Y, we're just saying to you, supply your own subject, supply your own predicate, right? Does that make sense? Okay, so that's my first point. My first point is you must not think of logic as a technical doctrine. You mustn't think of learning logic as learning wiring, or of learning logic as learning, I don't know, quantum physics, or of learning. It's not quite like that. It's a liberal art, which means you already know a great deal about it, And if I have the right skills myself as a teacher, I should be able to make everything we talk about, however technical, relevant. In other words, it should resonate with experiences, works, undertakings you already know. Okay? That you already know.
It doesn't depend on the language either. It's the meanings that are important.
That's a profoundly logical remark. Words are signs of conceptions. Conceptions are signs of natures outside the mind. What logic is about, if you want to know what's its subject matter, what logic is about are the relations among beings of reason, which are conceptions we make, we concoct, we conceive in the mind as formal signs of what's outside the mind. We're going to talk about that a little later in this class. So logic isn't about words, and it isn't about things. It's about the world of conceptions in the mind that link words to things. You think about the actual birth of logic. When did Aristotle manage to lay down for the first time treatises that systematized the presentation to us, language users, of what the uses of our language in the mind really are? And the answer is, or an answer is, he managed to do that in the face of the sophistic movement, which was doing to ancient Greece, ancient Athens in particular, what our own moment of Gnostic madness is doing to the United States of America and Western culture in general. Now, nothing in the study of logic is going to save Western civilization per se, but if Western civilization is saved, it'll be saved by people who respect logic. So I have a feeling
Professor,
I'm doing my best. Okay.
Professor,
Yes.
my name is Susan. When I was reading, I can't remember in which section, but it seemed to me that logic had a goal of seeking truth.
Yes.
And to me, when I read that, I realized that with in our society today, it's as if that has shifted upside down, and we as society no longer value seeking truth, and therefore we don't behave in a logical way.
Well, logic doesn't supply truth except about rational beings. That is to say, beings of reason in your mind. Those are the subject matter of logic. Logic doesn't supply truths about physics or sociology or politics. What logic does is permit those who think they have a truth about such subject matters, right, to trace it to principles and to present it in a way that makes those of us who hear capable of following the inferences. Okay? So logic is not itself an organ of truth except about beings of reason. But it is an organon, an instrument of truth in any kind of inquiry whatsoever. Do not despair. So long as language is the principal medium of human commonality, logic will have a place. Certainly the case that unless you and I can share one or more propositions, we cannot draw together any inference.
Yeah,
So
and I
if your
think that
reaction to everything I say is just, so you say, then it's true that you and I cannot reason together. So studying logic is not entirely benign. Okay? And here's what I mean by not entirely benign. I'm going to use a baseball metaphor because I like baseball. You know, some people are natural hitters. Right? They're natural hitters. And one of the worst things that can happen to them is to have a coach decide that he needs to correct their swing. Right? And so the coach has them dissect, analyze their swing. And to begin with, when they do that, they lose the capacity to hit. Their swing goes to pieces. Or again, I used to swim, AAU. And I had a terrible time with a coach who decided to dissect my stroke. She thought I wasn't reaching far enough. So she had me change the way I stroked, and I started losing races right and left because my natural stroke was taken apart. So if you have a natural rhetoric, a natural way of your own spontaneous way of working out arguments, and you start studying formal logic, for a time, your rhythm may be thrown off. So it's not entirely benign. Right? It's not entirely benign. It breaks one habit in order to replace it with a better one. But breaking a habit is breaking a habit, and it leaves you without the ease or spontaneity originally associated with that habit. So that's a warning. That's a warning. You may find this increasing, to start with, your difficulties. Now I'm going to change screen shares. If I can, there we go. Do that. So let me ask, are there questions about the first reading, the essay, three-part essay on, first off, logic as a liberal art, then the Aristotelian starting points, and then finally signs, or the doctrine of signs. I'd like to talk about the doctrine of signs, but I'd like to talk about it in a way that addresses questions or difficulties and isn't a way of responding to my own view of what's important.
Question about it is, why do they toss, it seems like John of
St. Thomas.
St. Thomas seems to be ignored today. Why was he discarded?
He had the misfortune of being Portuguese and living exactly at the same time as Descartes.
So Descartes won the fight.
Well, actually, Descartes got the press. It's not clear that they ever had a fight.
Okay.
Descartes got the press. That's the first thing. And as you think back to the late 15th, early 16th century, right? What's the big event? The Reformation. In the immediate aftermath of the Reformation, folks from the Catholic South are not reading folks from the Protestant North. And folks from the Protestant North are not reading folks from the Catholic South. So John of St. Thomas has a huge reading, a huge public. Right? His collected works were published during his lifetime. There's a huge public in Spain, in Portugal, in Brazil, right? In Italy. No readership whatsoever in the North. In the North. And we all know, after the Reformation, where is the Enlightenment?
In the North.
We've inherited all of the North. John of St. Thomas is revived in our own day, or at least my day. My day, since I actually remember Jacques Maritain. He's revived in the mid-20th century by Jacques Maritain in Maritain's own work. It's extremely impressive. So there's a kind of revival of John of St. Thomas, which is why I know anything about him, because my teachers read John and made me read John.
With Maritain, don't we have to be careful with his early development is different than his later years, or was he consistent?
He's fairly consistent after 1906.
He is? Okay.
For sure. He and his wife, Raisa, had decided they either had to find a reason to live or they were going to commit suicide together, and they converted to the Catholic Church. Maritain is on logic. Maritain is reads strangely to people who've read logic widely, English language logic widely, because he's so close to John of St. Thomas. He's very, very close. If you can find it, there's a book by Maritain called Introduction to Philosophy, which is the first half of which is devoted to logic, which is a recapitulation of his major logic. And then there's a book published by Sheed and Ward in 1946, first edition 1946, 6 editions thereafter, just called Formal Logic. And you can still find that. You can also find, it's terrifically expensive, the Thomistic, John of St. Thomas influenced textbook, which became the largest selling logic textbook in the United States between 1961 and 1971 or 72 by John Osterley of the University of Notre Dame, called Logic, the Art of Defining and Reasoning. That work, which I have, that work is reprinted at request by Prentice Hall, which owns the copyright, at $100 a shot. So you have to really want it. Okay. And then there are a few other books, important books that you can get, that you can still get in a library or find online. Can be done.
And what do you rank Kreef's Socratic logic book?
Where do I rank it? I
Yeah.
don't rank logic books. They all have.
How good is it? I've heard it's one of the best ones that are still teaching Aristotelian logic and not symbolic logic.
That's a very small group. It's easy to be one of the best in a group of 4 or 5 books in print. So no, I have no objection to Kreef's logic, etc. I would not, I personally wouldn't present logical doctrine quite the way he does. And you'll know that because what you're about to read from me is not presented quite the way Kreef does.
Does he cover the same ground in his book at all? Does what you're teaching in this course correlate to anything that he has, or is it?
Oh yeah,
separate?
the logical doctrine is pretty well settled.
Okay.
Yeah, it's pretty well settled. It's a question of emphasis. It's a question of order. So for example, some people would argue, I would be one of them, that the best place to study acts of division, what we call division, right, is in connection with definition, with acts of definition. John of St. Thomas, incidentally, treated division as a separate art and a separate work of logic, and didn't treat it with definition, treated it separately. So, you know, but Peter Kreeft, John of St. Thomas, and I, if you had us in a room together and asked, what do you think are the most important points in the doctrine of division, would probably give you just about the same answers. Just about the same answers. That makes sense? So I don't discourage you from buying Kreef's book. I don't discourage you from studying it.
Is the word, well, I guess the first question would be, are the words, and I think the answer is no, are the words percept and concept convertible?
No.
Okay, and then, so then would the word concept and idea be convertible?
Idea, yes, is a, well, I mean, so here we go, right?
The reason I ask is in your, one of your earlier podcasts, I think you said that we don't know ideas, we know through ideas, or ideas are that through
That's right.
which we know
That's right.
things.
We don't know concepts.
And that seems like the
We know
way
through
that
concepts.
seems like the way the concept functions in your graph. So
Yeah.
Is that accurate? Okay.
Yes. So let's talk about signs for a second. Okay. A percept, incidentally, is what you're having of my pixels and I'm having of your pixels right now. Okay. So you have a sense of the shape of my face, color, the shirt I'm wearing, etc., as I have of you. Okay? Now you are not seeing me. Your act of sight touches me. And your act of sight is a sign of my presence, my physical presence, which is nothing but a sign. It has no properties of its own except to convey to you, a sensitive power, the presence of something sensible.
And Corey, is that simply because it's over a screen? Would that be different if we were in person?
No, it would be all the screen does is increase the distance and the number of percepts. In other words, the number of signifying moments between you and me.
But I do still make the, I guess, so then the next step would be, given the percept of seeing you, I abstract to the concept of you. Would that be?
Yes.
How would you say that?
Well, I would say it this way. When you perceive me, you don't merely perceive this blob, etc., etc. Right? When you perceive me, you perceive at the same time similarities and differences with other things you've perceived. So, in other words, your percepts, because they are acts within you, never go away. Okay? And so you have them as a kind of catalog. Now, physiologists tell us, and I believe this of my cats, incidentally, physiologists tell us that cats' short-term memory lasts about 4 seconds. And then they're on to something new, right? Okay. But you and I have an immediate memory when we see something and that act ceases, the object of that act doesn't go away. It's recorded, so to speak, in memory. Okay? I have to draw a distinction here, Sean. The study of what happens in a sensitive power, like you or me, an animal, between seeing and thinking a thing is not logic. That's rational psychology. Okay? What logic does is pick up on the fact that you as a knower and I as a knower are knowers in two respects, two fundamental respects. We're sensors in which we're made aware of the presence of a sensible by a sign called perception or a percept. And we're thinkers in which we're made aware of the presence of a supersensible through a sign called the concept.
For the sake of the study of logic, we're sort of divorcing those two things, right? If we were
That's right.
talking in metaphysics, there'd be more of an organic unity to that, right?
Actually, if we were talking rational psychology, if we were reading Aristotle's De Anima,
Right. Okay.
right? Or if we were reading together, which I might do sometime, incidentally, for AMI, the wonderful book by Yves Simon called Introduction to the Metaphysics of Knowledge. We were doing those, we would then not take for granted, right, our ability to conceive and perceive. But in logic, we take that for granted. We're dealing with the facts of perception and conception.
Got it.
Now, what we have in perception and conception are signs that are called formal signs. And let me try to illustrate that. So everybody here is familiar with a stop sign, right? What is the meaning of a stop sign? When you see one, what does it convey to you, a knowing power behind the wheel?
Hit the brakes.
Put the brakes on and bring your car to a stop before the white line. Otherwise, the lurking policeman is going to ticket you, right? Now, what in the world is there about a stop sign which says, put the brakes on and bring the vehicle to a complete stop before the white line? It's a convention. If you go to Germany, you don't see these things. You see something else, right? You see a sign which is square that says on it in red, halt, with 2 exclamation points. Like, we mean it? No, we really mean it. Right? Bring the car to a stop. Okay. So a stop sign is octagonal, red, and white, right? White lettering, stop, mounted on a post, usually on the right side of the road, sometimes overhead, right? What in the world does octagonal shape, red, white, and hanging 6 feet in the air have to do with stop? Answer, there's a sheerly conventional connection, right? A sheerly conventional connection. And the stop sign is therefore an instrumental sign, because it has properties: redness, octagonality, hanging 6 feet off the ground, being made of metal, etc. It has properties that are knowable in themselves apart from its function as a sign. Okay, you could do a study of stop signs around the world. So that's an instrumental conventional sign. A formal sign, and there are only 2 in all reality. A purely formal sign, a percept or a concept, is nothing but the sign of that which it conveys to a knowing power. A stop sign conveys something to a knowing power, it's a sign, but it's also a thing in its own right with its own properties. A formal sign, a percept or a concept, is nothing but a sign of that which it presents or represents to a knowing power. And that's what it means to say, we don't know our ideas, our concepts. We know through our ideas, our concepts. And that's one of the huge changes from classical or perennial philosophy before the Reformation and the Enlightenment to philosophy after the Reformation and the Enlightenment. If you go read David Hume or René Descartes or Leibniz or Kant or any other modern, you will be told repeatedly, ideas, thoughts are what we know. And the huge problem is to figure out how they connect to things. Okay? For Hume, our mind is nothing but a theater of perceptions. Perceptions are what we know. And it's a huge question. Why? What goes on the stage of a theater of perceptions seems to be also what goes on outside the theater of perceptions. Right? It's a huge question. Right?
So
Traditional logic and traditional epistemology tell you concepts are not what we know. Concepts are the formal signs of natures or invisible things. And percepts are the formal signs of objects in the sense of sensibles or physical things. Okay. That makes sense? So the doctrine of signs, is the working out of what it means to say ideas are that through which we know, as opposed to our ideas are that which we know. Traditional logic takes it as given that we are conceptual, and that we are aware conceptually and perceptually, and that in being so aware, we are functioning through signs which we construct as knowers, but which are nothing but signs of that which we seek to know.
Is there any way to prove either of the two systems is reality and not just the general opinion of the majority?
Well, first of all, that supposes that there's a dichotomous division between things that can be proved as reality and things that are merely the consensus of the majority. Okay, so here's the way in which you can show that
Well,
the
I mean, you
traditional
basically said
doctrine.
there's two systems there, or
Yeah,
two
right.
ways of thinking.
Yep.
Which one is right? Or is there one that's right? Or could they both be wrong? And maybe there's a third way of looking at things that haven't been developed yet.
Well, as a matter of fact, there is a third way of looking at things out there that tries to find a middle path between the perennial philosophy and modern philosophy, and that's transcendental phenomenology a la Edmund Husserl.
Okay.
It's certainly out there. And one of the finest phenomenologists is cited in my essay, Father Robert Sokolowski of Catholic University of America. He's a splendid priest and a great philosopher, and is a phenomenologist. Now, I'm a Thomist. That's another way of saying that I'm a realist. That's another way of saying that I think, and I think I can make a good argument, depends on what you mean by proof, but I think I can make a good argument that if you take the Humean view, you wind up in problems you can't resolve.
The
Whereas
way I
if
look
you
at
take
it,
the Thomistic view, you wind up with solutions that you can rely on. There's nothing, philosophers don't know anything that peasant women don't know. What philosophers know is what peasant women know. But philosophers know it in a different way. Peasant women know it from experience. Philosophers know it from reasoned argument. You can say, well, why do we need philosophers then? Why don't we just rely on Irenic peasant women? And the answer is we don't need philosophers the way we need regular hydration and food and shelter, but we do need philosophers in the sense that they can help us to avoid, for example, the reign of sophistry, or the decay of confidence in the things we ought to value. That kind. In other words, we need philosophers to encourage and help us to conserve and cultivate our humanity.
Correct.
So I had never heard of this term perceptor, at least I don't recall it. But is this distinction loosely similar, like the distinction between the phenomenal and the noumenal? Because you've been mentioning phenomenology and whatnot. Is
Well, except
loosely?
that Kant doesn't think you can know noumena, right? The noumena is a boundary concept, right? Which tells you where the possibilities for experience end. So it's not like phenomena noumena. It's like this. It's that what language does for us. If you just think about it in everyday terms, what does language do for us? What does it do for us? It makes present what is absent. Right? Thanks to language, I can do what Coco the gorilla could never do, even in her most eloquent moments. And that is, given a little time and your attention, I can explain to you what it's like to walk through the 6th arrondissement of Paris when neither you nor I is there. So the power of language is to make present to us what is physically or perceptually or otherwise absent from us. Another way of saying that is the power of language makes it possible for us to be what we are as human beings, capax universi, capable of the universal. Capable of the universal.
So
If we take that seriously and reflect on how is it possible, because it is possible. We experience it every day. how is it possible for language to bring us as knowers into the presence of things from which we are physically absent, or to bring us into the presence of things which are such that they are beyond sensation? We ask how that's possible. Then we're on our way to A, realist philosophy, and B, the logic which grew up in the neighborhood of realist philosophy, which is the logic I'm teaching you, or that I'm prepared to discuss with you. Does that make some sense, Mr. Dees? And that, it seems to me, that's where I'm a strong Thomist. Has the view that the things we do every day are not deep, dark, horrible mysteries that we have somehow to dispel. The things we do every day are realities, which it is our business to understand.
And a
Partly
professor,
by way of giving thanks for them, incidentally. Sorry.
I'm sorry. So would it be fair to say that language actually gives humans the capacity to reach for the transcendent, to do
Absolutely.
theology? I mean, in other words, theology is dependent
Look, just
upon.
think of it this way. Just think of it this way. Look. Nobody, what does Jesus say about the Father, right? When the apostles say to him, show us the Father and that'll be enough for us.
He says, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father.
If you've seen me, you've seen the Father. He says that.
Yeah.
Right? He gives them a proposition.
And he waits
gives them a
until
proposition.
Peter says,
It's significant, is it not, that when God decides that he needs to save humanity, right? He's going to save humanity. He comes down to talk, right? To act too, but to talk.
yeah, through the word.
That's right. And when when the chips are down and the sign-seeking, we're only interested in what we can eat and touch and play with, Jews are walking off. And Jesus says to Peter, will you go too? Peter says, where would we go? You have the words of eternal life.
And when Jesus chooses Peter as the leader of his church, to me, it seems it's because the Father has given him the sign through what Peter says in response to the Lord asking all of them, who do
Flesh
you
and blood
say
have
I
not taught
am?
you this, but my Father who is in heaven. To Peter's
Right.
confession.
Who do you say that I am? And so because Peter gives the correct answer, that's, I think, Jesus' sign that he's chosen from the Father, right?
Well, Jesus doesn't need signs. He already sees straight into who Peter is.
He already knows.
But
Okay.
Peter needs signs. You and I need signs. Right?
Yeah.
We need them. So here's the thing about logic, right? We work in language. I'm coming up on what should be the break here. We work in language because the word is the sign of the concept or percept, which in turn brings what is absent brings us into the presence of what is otherwise absent. That's what it means to be a knower. What it means to be a knower is to be capable of being present to what is not physically knocking you on the head or otherwise causing you causal disruptions.
Is that a way of saying you're learning?
Learning means being able to induce the presence of things at will. Presence of what's
So
absent at will. If you just think of absence, sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
So kind of being the artist in the liberal arts is the learning process. And I wonder who decides that that what's produced is is quality of production.
So I missed
How do
that.
you know? How does one know when it says art as a human capacity places art at the service of the artifact itself? That would seem to be the artist is good and is creating something that would be good for the community.
So now you're talking about the difference between liberal arts and mechanical or servile arts. The servile doesn't mean
Okay.
bad. Servile just means the purpose is outside the artifact. Now, the thing about liberal arts is when we make the artifacts of liberal arts, we are actually making our own minds. There's famously over the gate to Plato's Academy was the motto, Medes agiometretos esito, which in Greek means, if you aren't geometrized, not no geometry. The Greek says, if you're not geometrized, if you don't have a geometric mind, stay out. Stay out. Because Plato thought that the entrance to philosophy or the entrance to wisdom is not logic, but mathematics. So if you're not geometrized, and that's what it means, that's what the liberal arts are. They're eisers. You're logicized, you're rhetoricized, you're grammatized, you're mathematicized, you're geometricized, you're astronomicized, you're harmonicized, if you know music, which means that you have a certain shape and capacity of mind. The capacity
become
to
like
build
the
and
word.
make intelligibles that hook up to the world, through which signs you encounter reality. You're able to make yourself present to the real.
And in that, you come to know yourself better, but you also come to know, the nature of what you're creating, and you know the nature of the creator. You become more like the creator.
There's no intellectual action in which we are more like creators than mathematics. There are things which are most fully, transparently constructible, and also most fully knowable and teachable. That's what it means in Greek. Ta mathematica just means the things that are most knowable and teachable for human beings. For human beings. That is for sense-based knowers like ourselves. Because in mathematics, abstraction is easy. We can get to the universal via abstractive acts in mathematics much more directly and easily than in any other domain. That's why Andrew Seeley is able to work miracles in a geometry course. Because we don't like that. The human beings are like that.
It's gorgeous. And is this the way that theology becomes the queen of disciplines? Because what you're really coming to know in that is
theology is the queen of disciplines
reality?
because theology is the queen of disciplines because it leads us to truths which are otherwise, strictly speaking, impossible for us.
So they require a certain amount of divine inspiration to understand.
Well, I just mean theology is a science. It is, it's rigorous knowledge, but you can't get it off the ground without revelation. You're talking about things you can't experience and things you can't arrive at by abstraction from sense. But you can arrive at them if somebody testifies to them about you, which is another way in which language makes us present to what's otherwise absent.
So there you're still in the world of logic. You're still operating in the world of logic. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
You can, look, if I, a theologian, want you, another theologian, to understand me, I have to give you an argument. And that means we're both in the world of logic to that extent.
I might get to be a witness instead, but whatever, it'll still be words.
The people who watched Jesus die on a cross saw different things. And the difference between what some of them saw and others saw had to do with what they would say.
And how
Not that what they would say
change
made
that.
the truth about things, but that they saw had to be conveyed, right?
Yeah. How they were moved by it, how they were changed by it, by what they saw,
Cortright,
what they experienced. Thank you.
Yes.
this might be a stupid question.
Well, let's make it the last one, and we'll take a little break because I can see the Migo effect beginning to establish itself. So please go ahead.
On page 11, you say words never directly signify objects or things.
That's right.
So I'm wondering, what would it mean to say that a word? I'm just going. It seems that they do. So what would it have to mean to say that words would signify things directly?
If they were labels, but that's not
Yeah.
signification.
Right. So it wouldn't be signification. So then I'm still wondering why it needs to be said. If
I'm
I'm
sorry.
saying that if words signify things, I guess I don't understand why.
Words signify things mediately through concepts. Words are conventional signs of concepts, which are formal and natural signs of natures, or essences, if you like.
Okay.
Now, because of that, I can substitute constructs in words for, I can use concepts in words to express the relations among, I can use words, relations among words, to express relations among concepts, which is what these essays do, which is why they're sometimes so cumbersome.
If I use an indexical like this,
Yeah.
Is that
Right, or for example, in the essays, I'll frequently italicize a term, right? And then you know I'm using that term in a particularly emphatic sense, usually to stand in for the concept that that term is the immediate sign of. So when I say animal, italicized, what I mean is the generic concept standing in relation to other concepts as the predicable through which they're distinguished in number and in kind. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that's I mean, we can go through that as we look at these. So I'll say this, and then we should take a little break. I'll say this. In these essays, everything is significant. That is to say, when something is italicized, that means something which has been previously noted. When something's in quotation marks, that means something which has been previously noted. Now, I can't guarantee to you, because I'm human and fallible, that I'm absolutely consistent in every one of these essays. I've produced so far this summer for this class about 250 pages of stuff, 100 of which has now been carefully vetted and posted, the rest of which will follow soon. So there are errors. That's why I'm saying that. I'm not saying that to boast. There are errors, right? And you should not be too surprised if you find some. But the systematic character will also be apparent. In other words, the errors will stand out because they're in the middle of a systematic consistency. Okay, so Sean, that's in a sense, that's to you. Because those little charts, which have the word, a line, and then down and up, right? Those are intended to stand in for the mediate character of the relationship between the word as sign and the object, the extramental object, of which they are ultimately the sign. But not directly, rather through the mediation of the concept. But there's no way that a word on its own can stand in for something except as a label. And so what's being denied there is that words relate to things as labels. They don't. They can't. They can't relate to natures as labels. Well, let's resume this after a bit of a break. Okay. Okay, so Sean, did you want to follow up on the question of the direct or indirect relationship between word and thing as a matter of signification?
I guess so. If a word were to, if you like a reductio ad absurdum, if a word were to signify directly a thing, the result would be what?
The result would be that you could only have labels. You'd have to have as many words as there were distinctions to be preserved.
Okay.
And the thing about words is, the good thing about indirect signification is that a single word can, through the concept it signifies, be communicable to a number of subjects.
I guess I'm just wondering, that seems to be what we mean by saying that a word signifies as opposed to saying a word is. So
Yes.
so why, so
A word doesn't stand for. It's not a token.
right.
It evokes an act of the mind, which is to conceive a formal sign connected to a number and different numbers of things.
Yeah, okay.
So you could think about it this way, right? One of the things that Mr. Mata would object to, say, in Kant, is Kant's notion that concepts are constructed out of individuals. The concepts are, strictly speaking, class constructs. In other words, that there's no single nature which is communicable among a many, apart from an act of the mind. So for Kant, we construct a world of experience. For the logic of the perennial philosophy, we encounter a world through the signifying power of our own concepts.
Because we can know, so we know things through concepts, but we do know things.
Yep.
So is there some kind of unity between concepts and things? Because you
Yes.
said earlier that
that's what it means to call a concept a purely natural and formal sign. It does nothing but
you're right.
direct the mind to a nature.
Is there a distinction between, because you said earlier that we create concepts?
We make them.
Is that in the case of a thing not being present to us? Because
Yes.
if I'm seeing a tree, isn't the tree informing my mind with the concept of itself? Is there a distinction to be made between speech and is that the difference between a percept and a concept? Is that what I'm stumbling upon?
Right. So what you do, look, so now we're straying off into rational psychology.
Sorry.
That's okay. We'll do that. We'll do that and we'll come back. Okay. So what makes a tree a percept, and thus your encounter with it at one and the same time an act of knowing and an event, right? An event is that the tree is signated matter. It's material. It's material. And what you do as a rational knower, when you come to look for what's so, which means what's common, is you abstract, you dematerialize the tree. So you have in your consciousness, in your mind, in your awareness, you have a note, a percept, and you dematerialize it. That is, you strip away in an act of the mind, you strip away what belongs to the tree in virtue of its being signate matter, that is, matter which is formed, and you get to the form in the matter. Okay. Now, forms as immaterial are eo ipso communicable. They can be common to things. And so as you dematerialize your encounter, the event of encountering the tree, you also create something which is a way, a one, that goes to a many and permits you to have the many through the sign of the one. That's called universality. That's the ordinary notion of universality. A one which is identically applicable to many, whether applicable by way of predication or applicable by way of standing in for, or however applicable. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So your encounter with the tree, your perceptual encounter with the tree is, Thomas would say, the beginning of thinking. And you are the sort of being, as a rational being, and rational just means looking for the relation between one and many. Right? That's what ratio is. Ratio is nothing but a one-many relation. So as a rational being, you're constantly, you are, your way of knowing, your way of being with things in consciousness is to abstract them, is to look for many's in the one.
So on this, if taking this classical model, I don't know concepts. I know through concepts.
That's right.
But I could know. There is a way I could know concepts if I treat
By reflecting on what you do with them in language.
Yeah. Right.
Like an abacus for a mathematics problem.
Yeah.
Or like a diagram in a geometrical proof. Yes, absolutely.
So I could say this is a universal concept. Right.
You can write right. You can write dog on a piece of paper, right? And write underneath dog on a piece of paper, right? This term will now stand for the essence shared by Odo the monk-biting dachshund, who's going to have a career in this course. A former dachshund of mine, who with his brother Bismarck had the habit of biting monks. We'll get to that. They've passed on to their reward, but they were. So you can have dog stand for Odo the monk-biting dachshund, or Lassie the hero collie, or whatever you want, by simply reflecting on and asserting, right, the role that words play in signifying through concepts.
Is it possible that singing birds are participating in the doctrine of signs as well? In the animal world?
Possible. I just don't have any evidence of it.
Really? Because
I don't think there's any.
I thought their
convincing
songs
evidence.
meant different things to them. Different songs or warbles. Nobody knows. Okay.
There's a wonderful book, which I'll recommend to you. I don't think it actually answers your question, but it's called Why Birds Sing, which seems to be a kind of arrogant title. in the sense that I don't think it's up to me, a human being, to explain to birds why they sing.
I was just looking like for the cutoff on the limit of the doctrine of science, because it just seems that some animals do recognize that, or, you know.
It's certainly the case. It's certainly the case that your dog or my dog has a limited capacity to associate verbal commands with behavior. That's certainly the case. Now, Aristotle, noted that 1,300 and some odd years ago, or 2,300 and some odd years ago. When he said that, the more sophisticated animals, the animals that are, as he put it, more perfect, by which he really meant mammals, but in any case, more like us, the animals that are more perfect have some share in memory.
Mhm.
And thus, for them, the possibility of experience. The problem is that they're not often able to take many experiences and make of them one notion,
Mm.
one concept. And what do you mean by that? What do I mean by that? I mean, no matter how sophisticated my dog's reaction to me happens to be, he never writes a poem about it. Or as Leo Strauss, the great political philosopher, once said when someone said to him, we can understand a lot about political society by studying rats, which they did in the 50s, as you know. Strauss answered, well, it seems to me there's a very good reason why rats don't tell us anything about their participation in our experiments. And it's this, they have nothing to say. Okay, so we got this notion then of the sign, at least bubbling. We'll have to come back to it a lot, but it's at least bubbling, okay? And the notion of the idea of a direct word-world connection, it's a non-starter. It doesn't fly. And it doesn't fly for a reason that we'll appreciate. Namely, it flies quite against common sense, which tells us that the principal function of language is to collect things as many's under one. And it's by collecting things as many under one that language manages to bring the many into our presence, or put us in the presence of a many which are not physically in contact with us. And that, if you reflect, not very deeply, but openly on the uses of language, you'll come to that view very quickly. Another way of putting the same thing is to say, we like to think of ourselves as the linguistic animal, the speaking animal, the zoon logistikon in Greek. Actually, probably we're the counting animal. Because in order to count anything, you have to know what counts. And in order to know what counts, you have to have a one which can be represented in each and every one of the many. And that's predication. So there's a strong connection between the quadrivial arts, which are all mathematically based, and the trivial arts, which are all logically or linguistically based. 3 and 4 in the ancient world, arithmetic and music, which are connected, the one as pure discrete quantity, the other as harmonies or ratios among discrete quantities. Then geometry and astronomy, the one as continuous quantities, the other as continuous quantities in motion. Or, if you like, continuous quantity, applied continuous quantity. And then on the trivial side, on the linguistic side, grammar, which means introduction to the intelligibility of conventional signs. Logic, which we're discussing now, and rhetoric, which in the medieval world went right through to poetry, metaphor, the whole thing, and under the medieval dispensation were understood as adjuncts to logic. So Thomas can talk quite happily about the logic of metaphor. It seems to me a healthy thing. Right? Okay. Does that make sense? Where we are now. Okay, so there are three things I want to be sure that that we can go ahead on. One is we can speak about beings of reason, that is, the logical constructs that we construct as signs connecting us to what is not immediately and physically present to us. We can talk about those things by appropriate linguistic structures. Because the words, right, are standing in for the relations among the beings of reason. If we're careful about it, we can talk about thinking by looking at the way words function. Right? Language functions for us. Okay? Just as we can talk about physics by looking at the way equations function. Okay? Or we can talk about astronomy by building models and putting them in motion. We can do that. We can do that with logic. And therefore, there's a close connection, very close connection, between logic and grammar. Most people think of grammar as purely conventional and of zero philosophic interest. If you read the paper by Brother Edmund Dolan, who's my teacher and a very fine man, he had that view in spades. He just thought that grammar had no intelligible content at all. I think he must have had a very unhappy 1st through 8th grade. But if you think about it, grammar has huge philosophical implications. Ludwig Wittgenstein, wrong about so much, was right about that. Right? Just think for a moment about the difference between an objectual and subjectual genitive. Purely grammatical distinction. It has huge philosophical implications. Subjectual genitive distributes a concept according to the subject with which it's connected. An objectual genitive distributes a concept according with the object to which is distributed to it. Right? They're objectual and subjectual genitives. That's a purely grammatical distinction. It has huge philosophical implications. One of the strengths of modern symbolic logic is that these connections are foremost in the minds of modern logicians. That's also the weakness of modern logic. There's not a balance there. Okay, so we can do, through careful linguistic analysis, that is analyzing forms of words, we can do an indirect, just like with a geometric diagram, we can do an indirect analysis of what's going on, as it were, among our concepts, or in our hidden conceptual lives. It's a startling reflection that absolutely none of us is aware of what's going on in our heads until we talk. There's no such thing as examining your thoughts without speech, internal speech or external speech. To know what you think, you have to write it down or say it to somebody or say it to yourself. Right? So the activity, the actuality, the activity of our passive and active intellects is hidden from us. Right? For the same reason that we don't see ourselves seeing. Right? We know we're seeing because we see things. Right? We don't know we're seeing because we see seeing. Right? We know we're thinking because we think things, which are expressed in words. Right? We don't know that we're thinking by thinking. Right? It doesn't go that way with us. And that's another way of saying we're rational beings. A way of saying we're rational beings. So I'd like that. to be sort of common property going forward. Okay. Now, I haven't done today, but I will do next time what the syllabus promises. That is, I will reserve the second half of the class to a discussion of the readings proposed. And there are 2 readings proposed next week.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
May I ask one a question? It'd be really dumb, but in this perspective, does it make sense to see a word as, since it provokes a concept, it's actually more of a verb than a noun? It's actually an action.
The concept it signifies is an act of mind. Run. Okay. When I think what it is to run, 2 things are going to happen. I'm going to be able to, I'm going to want to be able to express it in terms other than run. Right? Run means convert the distance between A and B rapidly, or something like that. I'm going to want to say that, which means an act of conception is going on. I'm taking the simply apprehended notion run, and I'm giving it a complex expression. Why? In order to test its, so to speak, to test its contours. Right? To give it a more articulate reflection. Okay? So yes, in that sense, all categorimatic, all significant or signifying terms, as opposed to and, but, or, everything, all signifying terms are connected with mental acts. Or if you like, when you use a word, you're thinking, and that's active.
True. I mean, I even got a rush of adrenaline when you first said the word run. I mean, it just was automatic. So it has to have some sort of movement attached, movement, in order to provoke movement in the mind. You know what I mean? There's got to be movement in that word, or to create movement in my body just by hearing it.
Well, we're embodied minds. So for example, reciting Auden's Ode on the Death of William Butler Yeats always makes me cry.
Right. Yeah. I was going to say, actually, this idea makes language and makes words. It can be very musical, and it can be very evocative. It's actually very beautiful. And why shouldn't it be? Because the original word was love.
Yeah.
You know, so all comes from that original reality.
Yeah.
How we choose to use it, I don't know, but it does really, I mean, you really have opened my mind to consider how important it is to think about the words we use. They have much more impact.
So the word logos, which is the word for word in Greek, right? The word logos is, of course, also the word for Jesus in the prologue to the Gospel of John, the name for Jesus in the prologue to the Gospel of John. But the word logos in Greek means word, meaning, significant statement, plan beneath things, structure. It has all kinds of meanings. And it seems to me that the word word in English imitates it for the most part.
That's very beautiful. And that example of audit is just perfect too. It really,
Yeah,
it
it's
just,
a great
it
poem.
connects to our humanness beautifully. Thank you.
Do you know that poem? The last stanza is just terrific. It's it goes in the nightmare
Take
of the
down the
dark,
stuff.
all the dogs of Europe bark, and the living nations wait, each sequestered in its hate. Intellectual disgrace stares from every human face, and the city and the tears of pity lie locked and frozen in each eye. Follow, poet, follow right to the bottom of the night. With your unconstraining voice, still persuade us to rejoice. With the farming of a verse, make a vineyard of the curse. In the prison of his days, teach the free man how to praise.
Uh,
The
it's,
whole poem's about
that's
5 minutes long, so it can't be recited. But it's a great.
worthy. But it's not the one that where he's mourning his friend and he says, you know, take down the stars,
Yes.
close. Is that the same one?
No, it's not the same
Pardon?
one. No,
No. Okay.
no, this one
Well,
begins. This one's great. It begins, Earth, receive an honored guest. William Yeats is laid to rest.
oh,
Let the Irish vessel lie emptied of its poetry.
I'll have to look that up. Thank you. That is absolutely beautiful. Thank you.
That's a great poem. Auden's a great poet. Not a nice
Yes, he
man, but a
is.
great poet. All right. Okay. So we can agree. Well, so try out the readings. I say in the syllabus that they're going to average about 25 pages. They're actually averaging about 28. And for the first 2 weeks, 30 to 35, but it'll get better with the third week. I guarantee it. And I'll also stop cheating by putting things in 11-point type instead of 12-point type, which I have been presently doing. I'll stop that. And you know, please read critically, come with questions, come with objections. Do not suppose that the word expert attaches to me in any fashion. It does not. And pay special attention to the primary readings. Now for next time, one of the primary readings is a translation of the first 4 chapters of Aristotle's Categories, with a lot of commentary from me and commentary from me in Greek. On the Greek, the Categories of Aristotle, which is the first of his logical treatises, first composed. It was probably composed while he was still living and working in the Academy of Plato. That treatise is absolutely foundational to Aristotle's metaphysics. It's absolutely foundational to Aristotle's logic. And it was so hard in ancient times, people would try to read it and then give up, that Porphyry of Tyre, the great Neoplatonist, wrote an isagoge, an introduction to Aristotle's Categories, which became the single most used text in the Middle Ages. So the Categories are worth your attention. That's what I'm trying to say. Categories are worth your attention. Take a look at those first 4, and especially pay attention to the distinction between things present in a subject, and hypokemena in Greek, and things sayable of something as of a subject in Greek. That's really the beginning of formal logic. So, and the beginning, incidentally, of substance metaphysics. So you get 2 birds for the price of a single hard to lift stone. So get it up and see what you can do. So just please come with questions. It's always better if we're talking about questions rather than rehearsing doctrine.
Right?
Yeah.
Can John of St. Thomas's work, Course in Thomistic Philosophy, can that be found translated in English, or is that?
Okay, here's what can be found in English. The Ars Logica the first part of his Cursus Philosophiae Thomistica, first part of it, the Ars Logica, can be found translated, the first part of that, called the Formal Logic, can be found translated in full by James Wade, S.J., still in print, through the Marquette University Press, 1955. You can still order that for, I think it's about 16 bucks, 12 bucks. Paperback, about 160 pages. It's a good translation. So that's there. The material logic of John of St. Thomas, the second part of the Ars Logica, is in a partial translation by Yves Simon and others, called The Material Logic of John of St. Thomas, University of Chicago Press, 1956. It's almost unobtainable.
Okay.
I bought my copy online from a bookstore in Madrid, Spain.
I was having a hard time finding anything by John of St. Thomas.
It's very hard.
I have his Gifts of the Holy Spirit, but I found Introduction to the Summa, translated by McInerney.
Yes,
Okay, what does that cover? Just his.
that's an
is that
outline
any-
of the Summa. It's the outline that John of St. Thomas prefixed to his Curs Theologica, which is
Okay.
a commentary on the Summa Theologiae.
Okay, so this is like his preface to that work that you
That's right,
read.
it's his preface to that work. Now,
Okay.
McInerney had a project going to translate John of St. Thomas, but he died
Oh,
before McInerney died, before that project came to fruition. So the introductory outline that you're referring to was the first step in that.
oh,
So the only place to find all of John of St. Thomas is in the Reeser Latin edition from Marietta, 1898, I think.
his brother never picked up the project?
McInerney's brother? No,
No.
no. McInerney used an awful lot of his royalties from all the novels and stuff to finance these publishing projects, Dumock's books.
Hmm.
That's entirely Ralph. And he, getting Richard Berquist to translate the commentary on the posterior analytics, that's all Ralph.
Hmm.
So with his departure, the world of Thomism is deeply
Is-
impoverished.
Is McInerney's translation of the Posterior Analytics, is that the one you recommend?
McInerney didn't translate the posterior analytics.
Sorry, Aquinas' commentary on the Posterior Analytics.
That's Richard Berquist.
Oh, okay.
Now, here's the thing, you might want to wait before you start buying these things. The so-called Thomistic Institute project is about a third of the way along. And they are producing, facing Latin and English editions in quarter-sized volumes
Nice.
of everything. All the commentaries, the disputed question on truth,
Awesome.
the De Malo, all the Aristotelian commentaries. Now, most of the translations are not new. They're editing older translations. So for example, the translation, this is the translation of the Summa Contra Gentiles, which is out, is the old Litzinger OP translation, but that's a good translation. And you have the Latin. So if you don't trust the translators, you just look across the page. and see what.
You can,
So those are coming out. If you go to, just go online to the Thomistic Institute, those are coming out and they're keeping it cheap, relatively cheap. That's a nice volume, well bound, acid-free paper, et cetera, large, so you can, so if you're old like me, you don't go blind trying to read it. And they're running about 45 bucks a pop.
I didn't realize they were doing everything. Pro tip for everyone is if you go on the I think it's St. Paul Center, I can post a link in the on the Magnus website. With the code Thomistic, you can get half off on all of those. St. Paul Center. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Great. That's terrific. And then, of course, if you know Latin, you can get everything Thomistic, everything he ever wrote, including the including the disputed authorship stuff, on the website called Corpus Thomisticum, CORPUSTHOMICT. Just enter it in Google. It's from the University of Navarre in Spain, and it's everything in the Leonine, which is the standard Latin edition, everything Thomas wrote, online. You can pull it up.
If I may make a suggestion as well to everyone, I don't know, you may or may not be familiar with this press. It's called Clooney Media.
Oh, yes.
They're the ones that actually publish John of St. Thomas's Gifts of the Holy Spirit currently. Yes. They have a bunch of books by Maritain out. If you're interested in out-of-print books, Catholic books, and they don't have it available, I would suggest that you contact them through their website and say, hey, what are you thinking about this? I actually reached out to them when I read your syllabus and asked them if they're considering reprinting Formal Logic by Maritain.
Oh, excellent. That's very, they've brought out a lot of Garrigou Lagrange, lots of stuff. So if you look, you'll find, you'll be surprised how much is there. Some things aren't. I mean, it's just too bad that the University of Chicago Press, which is otherwise excellent about keeping things in print forever, let the Maritain translated volume of the Material Logic of John of St. Thomas go out of print. That's too bad, but there it is. Okay, well, good. So you can all, we'll all go out now and keep decent publishers in business. And I'll see you next week. Thank you so much.